Winter hasn't completed leaving its mark upon the landscape here in the Blackstone River Valley. Still a lot of snow and ice around. Matter of fact, I'm reminded of a poem by Robert Frost, Two Tramps in Mud Time, and one verse goes, "The sun was warm and the wind was chill. You know how it is on an April day, when the sun is warm and the wind is still. You're 1 month on to the middle of May, but if you should so much dare to speak, a cloud comes over the sunlit arch, and a wind comes off the frozen peak, and you're 2 months back in the middle of March. To be sure, we are in that transition zone between the depths of winter and the coming warmth of spring. The question is, when is spring going to get here?" Hi, I'm Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service right here in the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, and we're out to discover some of the clues of spring. Now, you have to have a keen eye and you have to be observant. So join us as Along the Blackstone searches for signs of spring. One of the many beauties of the Blackstone River Valley is the ability to combine nature with history as we canoe and hike this fantastic river valley. Now, we happen to be in one of those transition zones where Mother Nature's handiwork as far as finding clues for the upcoming spring are most evident. On one side we have a forest and one side we have a field. And here I think we can find some good clues. On top of that, we're right by a trail that leads up to one of the best preserved granite canal locks of the Blackstone Canal era. Mixing history with nature, now I like that concept. Now I'll tell you what, we're going to be playing detective here, and my colleague, Ranger Dick Cleber, is probably the best detective you're ever going to find. Now he's a noted naturalist. He had his own radio show here in the Worcester area for 23 years every Sunday. He was a member of a scientific expedition that surveyed Mount McKinley back in the 1950s with a noted mountaineer, Bradford Washburn. You see, Ranger Cleber has done that, been there, and without Gore-Tex too. So I tell you what, to find those real clues of spring, let's track down Ranger and Detective Dick Cleber. Now Dick, why is this floodplain such a good transition zone for looking for signs of spring?
Well, there's so much happening here, Chuck. This, of course, the river came over this entire area where we're standing. This was underwater. It kept things from freezing. And there's a lot of things that have already started to develop underground. You may not be able to see it already. It hasn't sprouted. But in another couple of weeks, this is going to turn quite green. And of course, you'll have all kinds of wildlife in here as well, of plants and weeds and flowers, you name it. You know, this area, by the way, this floodplain, this happens to be the widest floodplain in the Blackstone Valley. It's well over a mile across. You've got the hills on either side. And boy, when you look at this, you say, what great farmland. Well, believe it or not, we learned from the Indians that you don't plant in this kind of soil. The soil is great, but they found that going up in the hilltops was much better. Why? Because of the bugs. Down here in the summertime, the insects are unbelievable, mosquitoes and all. And of course, so when the settlers first moved into the area, they too went to the hilltops. And this is why your villages and towns before industry were up in the hilltops. When industry moved in, they had to come down to the river for water power. And of course, that's why your villages are down in the valleys. Well, it's still just a little bit early, but you can see evidence. Red osier dogwood is turning very red. The bark is turning very red. You've got the buds on the trees are really starting to swell. Maple trees in particular. Willow trees, if you see a willow, it's already turned brilliant yellow. So things are on their way. Of course, the birds are just starting to arrive. The robins are here. Red-winged blackbirds are here early. They're supposed to come in about March 27th, but they came in a little bit early. It seems as though we've had a terrible, terrible winter, but believe it or not, this is nothing for nature. This is all averaged out very nicely.
Now, what about fairy shrimp? You mentioned that to me as we were walking over here. What are they, and where would they cohabitate?
Well, fairy shrimp, that's kind of no fair, because they're a sign of spring that starts way back in January.
Oh, really?
Whenever you get a pond, a vernal pool, well up away from the river, so there's no fish in it, you'll often find a fairy shrimp. What's a fairy shrimp? It's a shrimp about 1 inch long, 3/4 of an inch long, transparent. And you can actually see them swimming around on their backs. Absolutely marvelous. You look right through them. You can see their bloodstream, their heart, their organs. It's really a lot of fun. Of course, when they hatch out, they lay their eggs, and then that pool dries up. And the pool may stay dried up for as much as 10 years. And when conditions are right again and it floods again, the eggs hatch, and you have a whole new group of fairy shrimp. They're a remarkable animal. And they actually start to develop in January. But usually the pools dry up by late April, and that's the end of them. And just a fascinating story.
Well, that's incredible. Now, we're going to take a hike over here in a little bit and see what other things we can find. Any things we should be looking for?
Well, the best thing this time of year is to look for a change in the vegetation. It just looks awfully dead around here now. But underneath this grass, you'll start to find green things. Of course, in your garden or around your home, you've already got the snowdrops and the crocuses out. Same thing is happening here. It just is not as noticeable because of the tremendous cover of dried grasses. But the swelling of vegetation, birds, we may see quite a few birds already. Heavens, the great horned owl has already gone through its nesting. It starts nesting at the end of February. The woodcock is in. There's a variety of ducks in. It's really something if you pay attention.
So I really have to be observant, don't I?
Absolutely. And you got to go out often so you can bump into these things. They're not there every day. You have to go looking for them.
And so if I have a plot of land or even my own backyard, if I go out in the dead of winter, I go out again in February and March, I can begin to see changes because I have almost like a base of reference to go against.
Absolutely, you can. It's absolutely amazing. Every year it happens almost like clockwork. It doesn't really matter what the weather is. If you have an extended period of rotten weather, it can affect things. But basically, you don't get that. You get changes, cold, hot, or cold, warm, wet, and so forth, changing back and forth. And that actually makes things happen. It's that old sun that's doing the trick. That sun crossed the equator on the 20th of March. Spring began. It's getting higher and higher in the sky. The rays are that much more powerful. And that's what makes things happen.
Well, that's great. Well, let's go for a little hike and see what we can find here.
Great. There, Chuck, look. These are galls, insect galls. Not really a sign of spring, but people see these all the time and wonder what the heck they are. They look almost like a nut or a fruit.
Right.
They're created by an insect. An insect deposits an egg in the twig of the bush or the tree, and it's almost like cancer. It makes the cells of that particular bush go wild, and it develops this round, hard material. Inside of there is an insect, grows up, goes through its larval stage, and then it nibbles its way out. You see that little hole there?
Yeah.
It nibbles its way out and then it flies off. And every bush, almost every tree, has its own kind of insect, makes its own kind of gall. You may have seen goldenrod that has kind of a football-shaped gall. An oak gall, perfectly round. It looks like a an apple hanging up on the oak tree. As a matter of fact, they sometimes call them oak apples.
Oak apples.
So that's not a sign of spring, but boy, it's a perfect example of what did happen this past fall and winter.
See, we still have a little snow over there too.
Boy, look at that. That's an owl pellet.
It's a big one too.
Gee. You know, people go out in the woods looking for owls, and they make the mistake of looking up in the trees. The best thing to do is look under the trees for evidence that the owls are there. And chances are, with the owl pellets here, this is a perching tree. Of course, when an owl catches an animal, he can't chew it, he doesn't have any teeth. So he almost swallows it whole. And then inside just works it over and over, his muscles, taking the digestible meat out and leaving nothing but bones, teeth, and fur. And we can take this apart and actually pull the bones out, try and figure out what kind of an animal it was. Well, I'm not an archaeologist, so I can't do that well on it.
No.
You see.
Is that a little piece of a skull there?
No, I think that's vertebrae.
Vertebrae, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Oh, here comes a skull. There we are.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy. That's a good-sized animal.
And he swallowed that whole thing whole.
He swallows that whole. He can open up his mouth tremendously. Let's see what we got here. But it's neat the way they work it over and over with the muscle, like the gizzard, and take out the digestible meat and then just regurgitate this whole thing. And this is what you do. You look for these pellets on the ground, then you know that this tree is being used as a perch. You can go back anytime in the early evening and see the bird.
It's an amazing little bit of detective work you've done here, Richard.
Well, the owl did it for me.
You just knew where to look. So that's bigger than a mouse?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you know, the great horned owl, which is what has done this, can take an animal up to the size of a skunk.
No kidding.
He won't swallow the skunk whole. He'll tear off pieces, but he'll end up eating most of the skunk, including a lot of the bones.
Now, Dick, what kind of animal do you really think this is?
Well, if we could find the skull, we could work it out easily. Of course, this might have been a little bit too big to swallow the skull. Here, take a look at the fur.
Yeah, that looks like a squirrel, doesn't it?
It sure does. And of course, he may have caught this squirrel way over on the hillside and brought it over to this perch to eat.
That's amazing.
That's why these perching trees are much better to look for, and then look for the pellets. Then you know the owl uses it on a regular basis.
Now, behavior of an owl when you're looking for it, during the daytime, they're kind of resting.
Also, the great horned owl, which is one of our largest owls, has vertical patterns on his breast, and they blend in beautifully with the vertical stripes of a tree trunk.
Ah.
And boy, you look at a tree and you hardly ever are able to see an owl. But here again, if you know there's an owl here, you'd look that much harder.
Right.
And then you'd be able to find it.
And these are the clues we'd look for.
These are the clues you look for.
Well, that's amazing. Well, Dick, it looks like this post has a potential for a lot of different uses.
It sure does. Right now it's a warning of a safety zone. Keep the hunters well away from the buildings, 500 feet from a dwelling. But you take this thing and cut it off here, or even down here, 4 to 6 feet. It would be perfect for a bluebird house. Bluebirds really love this open field area. Of course, right now, this is an excellent place for bluebirds, but they have to find old woodpecker holes to put their nest in. They always nest in hollows, so the bluebird box is perfect. They particularly like apple trees.
Oh, really?
When the settlers first came in and planted their apples in orchards, bluebirds were very, very common. Of course, they disappeared with the DDT, but they are coming back, and the more houses we can put up for bluebirds, the better off we'd be. Of course, not only did the DDT start to get the bluebirds out, but the starling. When the starling was introduced into the United States, the starling started to take over the nesting holes in the apple orchards. But now, as I say, the bluebird is coming back, and we can give them a big help by putting up several bluebird boxes.
That's good news, isn't it?
It sure is, and you can do it in your own backyard.
Well, you almost read my mind, because that's one of the points I'd like to make, is a lot of these things about nature, they're observable in your own backyard, and you can create your own wilderness area in your backyard, and it's very easy to do, takes a little time, but the enjoyment for watching Mother Nature at her work is just simply incredible.
Mom, raccoons!
Don't get too close, they might have rabies.
Wildlife rabies has reached Massachusetts, and raccoons are the primary carriers. Protect your family and pets from this deadly disease. Do not attract raccoons or other wild animals to your yard. Secure rubbish can lids. Feed pets indoors and vaccinate them yearly. Cap chimneys and seal openings to outbuildings. Do not feed or handle wild animals. Help prevent the spread of rabies. Enjoy Massachusetts wildlife from a safe distance. For information, write Rabies, Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, Westboro, Massachusetts, 01581.
This portion of the Blackstone River holds a clue as to the reason why entrepreneurs ventured in the valley to seek their fame and fortune. You see, the melting winter snow provided tons of water held up behind these dams. And by the 1840s, there were at least a dam per mile along the Blackstone. Now, to learn why and how water power was so critical to the development of the Blackstone Valley, let's catch up with Ranger Jack Whitaker for our Blackstone moment.
Here in the Blackstone Valley, we're very fond of using time and effort to celebrate the Industrial Revolution here in America. We forget that there was a major revolution thousands of years before the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, when man ceased to be a hunter-gatherer and became a farmer. He cultivated crops and he domesticated animals. As life became more sophisticated, more complicated, man was looking for other sources of power besides his own muscle and the muscles of his beasts of burden. The invention of the wheel, of the lever, were steps in that direction. One other source of natural power was that steady stream that flowed by a farm or a house, day in, day out, year in, year out. There was a source of power if it could be tapped. When you think about it, a cubic foot of water weighs 62.5 pounds. And if we could put a dam across a small stream like Abbott Run here in North Cumberland, we could back up millions of cubic feet of water, each one of them weighing over 62 pounds. That is a potential source of power. It's a giant battery back behind that dam ready to be tapped. What we do then is take a small ditch or a trench or a power canal off that reservoir of power, and run it to a water wheel. And this is how early man began to convert water into water power. By putting that water on a water wheel, the shelves of which would hold several or dozens of cubic feet of water. Tons of water pouring over that water wheel kept it spinning. And with that, you could run belts and pulleys and shafts and any number of machines. If you came to the valley today, you would find water wheels still operating. At the Slater Mill Historic Site, there is a working water wheel still running machinery. It's a fascinating sight. This is Jack Whitaker in the Blackstone Valley saying, come on down and visit one of our mill sites and see how it was done 100, 200 years ago.
After going through such a heavy winter, it's not unusual for electric company crews to be out checking their poles, make sure they're still sturdy enough to carry power. But in this case, the pole we're going to check out is actually the future home for an Osprey family. Now, to learn a little bit more about this fantastic partnership between Blackstone Valley Electric Company and Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife, we're going to hike through Valley Falls Marsh, find a future home for the ospreys, and learn a little bit more about teamwork. We're down here in the Lonsdale Marsh, and if you're a birder, you know exactly where we're talking about. However, it's also known as the Valley Falls Marsh, the Lincoln Marsh, but it's down here by the Blackstone River, and it's in a gorgeous part of northern Rhode Island, surrounded by industrial Rhode Island. And we're here with Todd McLish, who's with the Blackstone Valley Electric Company. He's their public relations guy. And what are the harbingers of spring, Todd, that we've come across down here in the marsh today?
Well, certainly I keep hearing the red-winged blackbirds that are singing as they have arrived. The blackbird family is the birds that tend to return from the south earliest in the spring. Here we're still in the winter still. But ospreys are the first hawk, and they're why we're here today.
They certainly are. Todd with Blackstone Valley Electric and Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife is actually here putting together an osprey stand. Now, how did Blackstone Valley Electric get involved with this project?
I'm, I guess I call myself an obsessed bird watcher. So I'm into birds to begin with. And it just so happens that osprey like to nest on the top of utility poles. Since they seem to be making a comeback these days, we wanted to try to expand their range into the Blackstone River Valley. And so with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we identified right here at the Lonsdale Marsh as a great place to try to get them to nest. They've definitely been seen all around this area, but they haven't been known to nest along the river. So we're hoping that by putting up a pole with a platform attached, that it will be the encouragement that the birds need. Got a booklet from the Canadian Fish and Wildlife Service, which is doing just like we are, trying to attract ospreys to nest in their area. And they have a whole 40-page guide that describes all different ways of building and installing osprey poles and platforms. So we took one of their designs and used it here.
It looks really good. You had quite a contingent of folks helping you put up the pole, didn't you?
Well, everybody was pretty excited about the project. This isn't your usual electric utility project. So the people that were involved in building the platform and attaching it to the pole and installing the pole were pretty interested in doing this. This was a change of pace for them.
Now, you approached Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife, didn't you?
Yes, as I said, I'm a bird watcher and knew of the plight of the osprey, knew that the osprey were making a comeback after their population dipped significantly because of DDT, and knew that they were flying around this area, so I was hoping to get them to nest in the area. So yes, I approached Fish and Wildlife Service. It seems a natural project for an electric utility to become involved in. We have the poles, we have the pole digging equipment, and obviously, and we have pallets to make it easy to make an easy platform. So this seemed to be a natural project for an electric company to get involved with.
Now, why is this a good habitat for the osprey?
Well, the osprey feed on fish, and now that fish are returning to the Blackstone River as it's been cleaned up over the years, this is a great spot for osprey to nest. They like to have a clear view of an open area of water, and this particular site here is a perfect site. So with the pole up above the level of the other trees in the area, the birds can sit in their nest or sit in an adjacent perch and see the open water and fly down and get a meal pretty quick.
Now, we've traveled a few miles south from the Lonsdale Marsh down to the Great Swamp Wildlife Management Area to catch up with principal wildlife biologist Lori Suprock with Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife and find out a little bit more about this great partnership between Blackstone Valley Electric and Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife. Lori's been kind enough to join us because she's going to answer some of our tough questions about osprey. Now, Lori, osprey and their nest, how easy is it to build a nest way up like that?
Well, for an osprey, it's pretty easy because they're very talented birds. There's no such thing as a dumb osprey.
Really?
Because they don't make it very long. Ospreys are very wary birds. They like to be the top dog. They don't want to know that there's something lurking overhead of them to be fearful of, so they like to be on top looking down. And in Rhode Island, it's power lines. It's pretty remarkable. These birds have flown from the West Indies and the Caribbean and South America to come back to this very spot, and their young will come back within 18 kilometers of where they were born. Well, it's helpful to their lifestyle in that, well, if they're used to being in this area, then they know where their food sources are. And they're kind of a loosely communal feeder. So therefore, if one bird finds a good source, he'll say, come on gang, let's all go down there. Rather than in many hawks, they're territorial.
How did you get involved with the Lonsdale Marsh as being a good habitat site?
Well, when Todd McLeish contacted me, he had a couple of sites in mind, which really helps me out. I give people the parameters. They need to be with where there's water nearby. There has to be a good fishing source. There should be a lot of openness. A lot of people find some of the parameters, but there'll be high backdrops of very tall trees, and the ospreys would be too wary of that. So we look for wide open spaces, and hopefully not too close to a marsh where there would be some wetland infringement where we can get a good solid pole.
Lori, with your duties with Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife, why were you a logical person for Todd to call?
Well, I've been working with the Osprey project since 1978, and at that time there were 15 nests that we were monitoring, and now we're up to about 60 nests. So it's become more of a partnership where I can't possibly be at all those sites to count how many young there are, and so I rely on people who are interested in ospreys and who want to help ospreys to help the program, and this is why we're contacting some of the other big agencies or land trusts or civic groups who are interested in ospreys and who can help. Ospreys are very flexible. What we want to do is provide them a good structure where they'll be able to weave in the sticks and they'll be able to stay over winter through some storms. But they are pretty flexible, and there are many designs that people can choose, and basically it's by locale. If you are in an area where you have no height restrictions, you can put in a low nest without some of these other features. Ospreys like to have an area to perch on. When the male comes back with the fish, he wants his choice part first, and he wants a little perching area, so people can tailor the nest to suit their needs.
Now, are there any predators to the osprey?
Interestingly enough, ospreys aren't one of your tougher hawks. Other hawks will try to muscle in, great horned owls, in fact. There'll be incidences where gulls or crows may try to steal fish. And then we also have to be very careful about man. A lot of times, especially in corridors where there are power lines, kids with ATVs will disrupt an osprey, or if there's a pole in a water like 100 Acre Cove, sometimes these little boats will annoy them too. Ospreys are federally protected, but they're not endangered. They were a species of local concern because of the DDT having such a devastating crash. Between New York and Boston, 90% of the 800 nests were no longer active because of DDT, and now we're probably back halfway at this point.
Now, are you still seeking nesting sites?
Well, we do, because Rhode Island is so small, and the birds could return and choose Connecticut or Massachusetts. So if they were a suitable place, we'd like to keep them here.
So the general public, or even companies such as Blackstone Valley Electric or the other power companies, if they have some sites that seem to fit your needs, they should still give you a call.
Absolutely. We would prefer that ospreys choose sites in good areas rather than get in trouble on site structures like airport towers where they could impede signals. This has happened in the past where ospreys have caused power outages or interfered with signals on beacon towers, and so it's preferable that we put up poles where we want them.
So the partnerships to help put that nest up in the Blackstone Valley and Lonsdale Marsh, and the partnership to put this nest right here down in the Great Swamp, are still very important to how Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife interact with their friends and partners.
Absolutely. We think it's wonderful that the electric companies are so helpful to us. They'll survey the nests at certain times of the year when they do their flights for repairs, and we really appreciate all their assistance.
Well, it looks like that the signs of spring are indeed around us. Matter of fact, I asked my good friend Dick Cleber, I said, was the area we were hiking in special? He said, no, not really. You see, the artistry of nature can be found anywhere, on an open field, on a mountainside, even in your own backyard. Well, this has been Ranger Chuck Arning with the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, and I just want to leave you one thought. If you can be observant, you too can appreciate the web of nature that is spun for us every day. See you in the valley.